G'day mates, it's Busta here. But before the video begins, I would like to give Skylight Frame a shout out for sponsoring this video. So, I've been looking for a great gift for my mum for the past few weeks for Mother's Day, and it's always super difficult for me because my mum is so picky. And then I was introduced to Skylight, and it's such a fantastic gift. So Skylight is a digital photo frame that allows everyone in your family to email photos to your loved one's Skylight, and they'll pop up in their home in seconds. It's super convenient to use and takes under 60 seconds to set up. Just plug it in, use the touchscreen to connect to your wireless network, and enjoy. The Skylight frame is really sleek and even has this cool feature where you can swipe through photos and tap to thank the person who sent the photo, which makes the frame interactive and fun to use. You can preload your favorite photos so it becomes a personalized gift, and Skylight also provides full refunds to anyone who's not 100% satisfied with their product. When I first heard about Skylight Frame, my first thought was, what a great way to display all the photos on my phone. I'm actually really looking forward to sharing this gift with my mum this year. And now, as a special Mother's Day offer, you can get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com and enter the code BESCARED. That's right, to get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame, just go to skylightframe.com and enter the code BESCARED. That's skylightframe.com and the promo code BESCARED. I hope you guys take up Skylight on that generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. This is a story that happened to me when I was a child, and I thought I'd share it on here. I've never shared it with anyone really before, so here goes nothing. So this took place back around 2008, if my memory serves me right. Me and my family had just moved to Costa Rica, and we enjoyed spending most of our time at the beach. But one beach in particular, which was near a lovely little river that I like to swim in. And it was on this same beach that 9-year-old me found a dead body floating in the ocean. To give a little context, I'd been playing on the beach, which we thought was a relatively safe beach, so my parents were farther up. How wrong we were about it being safe, though. I remember seeing something floating in the water, but I wasn't sure what it was, so I went to investigate, and found a dead man just floating there. Part of his leg had been hacked off. It was obvious that he had not drowned. The man had clearly been murdered. Around this time, we had heard about a recent string of murders that had happened both on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, where we were, and on the Pacific side. The murders had been happening every 6 months, rotating in between both regions of the country. So, there was reason to assume that this murder had been done by the same person since it seemed to fit the timeline. As far as I can remember, the details of the murder were never disclosed in any of the local newspapers, only that the man had been a tourist from England. So there was no way for anyone who had not seen the man on the beach to know the specifics of his murder. Eventually the whole thing blew over and we returned to that same beach. I can't quite remember a time frame, but it was definitely within a few months of me finding the dead man that this next part happened. One day, I was swimming in the river with my mother when a very strange man popped up out of the water, startling us. He had a spear gun in hand and snorkel mask on, and anyways, he began talking to my mum, and I think we could both tell that something was just off about this guy. I wasn't really paying attention for most of this conversation, but I do remember him bringing up the recent murder on the beach, and he seemed to know a great lot of details about it too, which, as I previously mentioned, were not available to the public. It almost seemed as if he was trying to confess that he was the one who murdered this man, but without directly saying so. He also talked about how he travelled in between the Caribbean and the Pacific side of Costa Rica, spending half a year in each spot. Eventually, they also got onto the topic of what he did for a living, and he went into great detail about how he made the masks for the movie Eyes Wide Shut, and that he would make those masks, and I presume other ones based on real-life human emotions, and that he specifically liked capturing the look of fear. We were totally taken aback by this guy, and honestly, didn't really know what to do. Eventually, we just got back into the river and swam away, and thankfully, we never saw him again. I do not know if this is related or not, but the weird strain of murders suddenly stopped after that too. So I have 3 kids, 1 biological, and 2 of them were recently adopted in April. One of the adopted kids is a girl, so I have a daughter now, but when these incidents occurred, it was before we were matched with them, so I only had my son with me. But this is relevant. The first incident occurred at a restaurant. I live in a small but rapidly growing town, and we'd been out to eat at a brand new restaurant and were on our way out. My husband had already gone out to the car, but I had stayed inside to take my son to the bathroom. He was 6 at the time. So, as we were leaving, trying to get past a crowd at the door, an old man stopped me and asked, "Do you have a daughter?" Thinking that he'd simply mistaken me for someone else that had a daughter, I told him no and tried to keep walking. But he continued to speak and I politely stopped to listen. He said, "I have a daughter. She's the prettiest, sweetest thing you ever saw, but what I always wanted was a son just like your boy here. I would give you my daughter if you would let me have your son. She's the prettiest little girl that you'll ever see." Alarm bells instantly went off. I kind of nervously laughed like it was a joke and said no, then made a beeline out of there, squeezing my son's hand tight. He hadn't heard what the man said yet. The guy was a complete stranger. I'd never seen him before, and I was walking past him when he stopped me to ask me to trade my son. I tried to write it off as just a weird random encounter and forget about it. But a few months later, I was at the Walmart with my son, just me and him. At this time, we had just been matched with our other 2 kids but were waiting on a new license, so we hadn't even been allowed to meet them yet. We knew their ages and that one was a boy and one was a girl, but not much else. We had picked up something small that day, so as we were walking toward the door to leave, I had the bag in one hand and was holding my son's hand in the other. He had recently turned 7, and as we passed by a customer service desk, a disheveled-looking man in dirty overalls reached towards us and stopped us. At first, I thought he was just a homeless man and going to ask for money, but when he asked if I had a daughter, I realized that it was the same man from the restaurant a few months earlier. He went through the entire spiel again about his pretty little daughter and wanting to trade for my son. When he finished his speech, I told him no, obviously, and that we were adopting a girl, and then we just walked away from him. To be honest with you, I don't know why I told him about adopting. I'm not too good in social situations, and it just kind of popped out. He stared at us with a slightly surprised look, before calling out, "You're a better person than me." We ignored him and just hightailed it out of there. A few moments later, my son, who had been quiet this whole time, said, "You wouldn't trade me for anything, would you?" And I assured him that I never would. I made a post about the encounter on Facebook too. Shortly after that too, one of my friends directed me to a conversation in one of our town pages where other women were talking about an old, dirty, disheveled man in overalls telling them about his pretty daughter and wanting to trade for their sons. I can't really remember what he was wearing at the restaurant, but I think that he had been dressed up a little nicer then. Now, I could understand striking up a conversation with a stranger and, in the course of it, maybe joking about trading kids. Still not entirely appropriate, I know, but understandable, right? But this guy, he seeks out women with young boys, who he has no business with, and asks to trade. One woman said that the guy actually followed her out of the store and kept talking about his beautiful daughter. I think he was kicked out of a few stores in town because he wouldn't stop doing this after employees told him to quit. He could just be a harmless old man with a twisted sense of humor and poor social skills, or he could have mental problems, I suppose. Or maybe he has bad intentions. Though, I don't know anyone who would agree to trade children with anyone, much less a creepy old stranger. Oh, and for the record too, no one has ever seen this beautiful daughter that he keeps talking about. So I guess my question for you guys is, which of these do you guys think that is more likely? So I just moved to a new city and had a few friends, but still wanted to meet some new people and maybe a cute girl to date. I began using Tinder, which I had fun with in other cities. I matched with this gorgeous woman, way out of my league, and her profile was funny and interesting. We get to chatting, and she's flirtatious and clever, and let it drop that she went to a top artsy school in France. So, obviously, I'm pretty intrigued, and also thinking that she's out of my league. Why is she so interested? So, I decided to Google her, which is not something I used to do before every date. Usually this will bring up a Facebook, an Instagram, LinkedIn account, etc. But when I clicked enter, her name came back with like 125,000 hits. News articles, videos, everything. And chronologically, the weirdness begins like this. As a teenager, she was one of those women who would start up correspondence with serial killers and had actually been engaged to 2 of them on death row before they were put to death. Next, she was engaged to her 6th grade English teacher in her early 20s. He was famous for having falsely claimed to kill Jean John Bennett Ramsey. For this, she was on Good Morning America saying he was going to use her to recruit 6th grade girls for a sex cult. Lastly, she became a high-end escort in the city and had a fairly popular blog about it too. I'm not shaming the sex worker community here, but still, it was like sprinkles on the weirdness of this whole thing. After seeing these things, I was intrigued and kind of creeped out by her, and found out that she was the adopted daughter of a local billionaire. And I decided at this point that this just wasn't worth it, and deleted Tinder the day before our date. The next day, she messaged me on another dating app asking me if I was still going to meet her for a drink. And it was a big fat no from me. About 10 years ago, I was between 19 and 21. I was living in an apartment with who would eventually be my wife and our cat. It was around 4 or 5 p.m. She was getting ready for work when I heard a voice. It wasn't scary, but it was definitely not human or nice. It started saying stuff like, "I'm going to get you. Oh man, I'm so going to get you." It was excited that it was going to get me, whatever that entailed. Obviously, I was terrified. I was a 20-year-old man curled up in the corner of our bed against the wall covered in blankets. I told my wife, and she pretty well ignored me. What was she going to do anyway? She didn't hear anything, and she had to go to work. I feel like this went on for about 10 minutes at most, long enough for my wife to finish getting ready for work and leave. I was alone, but all I could do was wait. Suddenly, our cat comes tearing into the bedroom, leaps onto the bed, swipes about 1.5 feet in front of me, then leaps off the bed and runs. The voice is gone, and I'm alone, but was I just hearing the cat, or did the cat just protect me? There was only me and my wife and the cat obviously in the building at the time, and it was an old house turned into 5 apartments. We lived on the 2nd floor, and our bedroom was connected to 2 outside walls and the rest of our house. I talked to my wife about it too, but she's of the mind that there's no point thinking about something if nothing can be done about it, so all I got from her was confirmation that I heard something say that it was going to get me. I've had other experiences too, but nothing like this. So a little bit of background. Growing up, I used to go with my mum to work sometimes because, well, she occasionally couldn't find a babysitter. I usually liked it though because it was fun to walk around the store and help with little things here and there. Though, that being said, it wasn't a very bad part of town in a not-so-good city, so I grew up around transients and homeless people. I think in hindsight, though, it was probably a good thing because it let me see that they were just normal people in bad times. But that also gave me a bit of a sixth sense for people since robberies have happened while I was actually in the store before. My mum always kept me cooped up in a little office in the back, so I was never in danger. Now, one day, my mum had to go into the store to pick up some check stubs, so I came with her. There was usually this homeless guy named Randy out front, and he never caused problems, and the whole store knew him, so they let him sit there to rest on rainy days like it was on that particular day. We walk inside, and my mum tells me to go by the registers and wait for a little bit. So I start leaning on things and playing with buttons of a broken cash register right next to the exit. I should also say too that today was an especially dead day at the store, so there was only one check stand open at the other end of the line of the cash register. As I'm pushing the buttons, I feel a tug on my shirt like someone is behind me. I assume it was my mum and turn around, only to see that it was a middle-aged couple that had deep wrinkles. The man smiles at me and says, "Hi, we were wondering if you want to buy a puppy. We have a few in our car that we can show you, one if you want to see one in the car right now." I immediately get really bad vibes from these people. My mum always told me about people like this growing up, so I was already pretty scared from that. I tried to get past them and say something about needing to tell my mum and ask if I can get a puppy. As I'm walking around them, the man grabs my arm tight and starts to drag me to the door. I immediately grab on the edge of the register and hang on for dear life while calling for my mum. The man didn't look strong, but compared to the strength of a kid, it felt like fighting against a bear. Eventually, of course, he pried me off the thing and I was ready to turn around to fight tooth and nail if need be. I was going to make sure that we made noise. But as I turned around, Randy was right there looking at us and asked if everything was okay. The woman this time came in a hurried tone said, "Oh yes, he's our son. Come on, Greg." I screamed my name is Carlos, and just then my mum started coming down and saw the guy holding and rushed over, separating us, and said in a deadly serious tone, "Can I ask why you're holding my son?" The couple seemed to stop for a moment and think, and then the woman said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I thought that was our son. We better go look for ours," and rushed past Randy at the door. I told my mum what happened when they left, and she thanked Randy profusely afterwards and held my hand every time that we went to the store afterwards. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Before the episode continues, I would like to give Green Chef a shout out for sponsoring this video. Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company that makes eating well easy and affordable with plans to fit every kind of lifestyle. Green Chef lets you choose from a wide array of easy-to-follow lifestyles and select organic ingredients. Recipes are quick and easy with step-by-step instructions, chef tips, and photos to guide you along too. You can switch up your meal plan whenever you're ready to try a new way to eat, and everything is hand-picked and delivered right to your door. Green Chef has an enormous menu, and I really love the way that they organize their selections into different dietary and lifestyle choices. Meal plans include paleo, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Mediterranean, heart smart, lean and clean, keto, gluten-free, and omnivore. I personally love a good curry dish myself, and their red coconut curry looks really tasty and wholesome. So, for $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/bescared. That's $50 off your first box at greenchef.us/BESCARED. I hope you guys take Green Chef up on their offer, and without further ado, here's the rest of the episode. So this takes place at the rather infamous Myrtle's Plantation. Now, I know that with places that are kind of touristy as far as paranormal things go, they can be kind of questionable as far as the validity of what happens there. And this being such, I always tend to err on the side of caution as far as what I believe. And I always do a fairly thorough check of wherever I'm staying for any artificial motors and wireless speakers, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. And the cabin that we stayed in came up clear. So, we arrived at the plantation at around 2 p.m. and we were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I got vibes just all over the place too. It was pretty insane already because I get vibes, but rarely do I get vibes that strong. We were then shown the place that we'd be staying that night, and we were let in and essentially set free. I did my evaluation on the room, and then afterward I noticed something. Near the back door of the room I got an insane vibe. Like, even stronger than the rest of the grounds. I just knew that something had happened there. I knew that I had to find out what happened, and this comes back up again later. By this point, it was probably around 5 p.m. and, understandably, we were pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town to get some food. We got back around 6:30 p.m., and began to walk over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier came over, knowing that we were paranormal enthusiasts, and asked if we wanted to see her room, which was in the actual plantation house. We were staying in a slave cabin. Now obviously, we said of course, and she brought us up to her room. We looked around and it was pretty regular as far as vibes go, but when I went into the bathroom, I felt the most oppressive and just awful atmosphere. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it, and instantly wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think something had happened there, but I knew that something inhabited that bathroom, and I knew that it wasn't something kind. We didn't stay in that place for long, but it was cool to look at, I must admit. We left after probably 10 to 20 minutes, I'd say, of looking around, and we went back to our cabin and got settled in for the night. My sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, slept in the same bed because, well, we were scared. She and I stayed up pretty late playing a game called Farkle. It's pretty fun and really good for a time killer. And as soon as midnight rolled around, we decided it would probably be best to put away the game and just go to bed. But as soon as we had put the game away and the noise of the game and our voices were gone, I noticed a noise. The rocking chair on the front of the porch of the cabin was rocking methodically back and forth. And the rocking I heard was hard enough back and forth that I was certain that it wasn't any wind responsible for it. I must admit that I got a little bit freaked out by that, but I decided I wasn't going to mention it to my younger sister as it would probably just trouble her. So she and I laid down to sleep. She fell asleep pretty quickly, but I was having issues falling asleep with all the thoughts and the worries running through my head. But all of those seemed quickly rather irrelevant as I heard footsteps on the stones outside of the cabin. Now, our cabin was fenced in, and so it couldn't be entered by anyone who didn't have the key. But regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard light slaps of feet in the wooden porch along with a groan of the weight, and they continued on forward, and the noise continued right on through the door, as I heard the figure pass right by my bed, but didn't see anything, and then continue at the back door. I also smelt some sort of rosy scent. Obviously, I really had a hard time falling to sleep after that. This event happened around 1 in the morning, and I didn't fall asleep until around 3:30. When we woke up, we went into the main house for breakfast, and we heard a noise from the other campers about their experiences, which were equally terrifying, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet, but the cabin was actually void of people. We ate and shared our stories, and then returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets and just relaxing, as it was a pretty nice cabin despite it being haunted. Then, I can't remember why, but my sister and my mum got into an argument. The argument obviously didn't sit well with whatever was in that cabin, because their argument was cut short by the faucet in the bathroom turning on full force, and then turning back off again. And at this point, the three of us freaked pretty bad, and we cleared out of the cabin in no less than 30 seconds. That was how that ended, and I'm never going to forget how scary it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly realize you're not alone. So this happened to me about 3 years ago, but I'll start with a bit of context. I was chosen to go to an exchange trip to Estonia as a part of my music course at college. During the trip, everyone was to be allocated into bands. In these bands, we would write music together and get the opportunity to record our songs at high-class music studios. Anyway, the day of the recording session had come, and I was the bassist for the last band that got to record that day, so I spent most of the day at the hotel where all the international students stayed. I shared my room with 2 other students who came from my college, and they both had early recording sessions booked. By the time I was packing my equipment to leave for the studio, most of the students had started coming back. The studio was only a short walk away, so I got directions from one of the students and made my way there. After about 3 hours at the studio, I started to make my way back to the hotel. As I rounded the corner into the hotel street, I took my phone out and looked up a good album to listen to when I got back to my room. I had my head down at my phone, music blasting from my headphones, and wasn't really paying any attention. As I entered the hotel, I took my headphones out and made my way to my room. And I noticed that it was just really quiet. This was really strange, especially as the hotel was right in the middle of the city. I got to my room and tried to open my door, but it was locked. I was told by my roommates that they would be back by this time, that they would leave the door open for me. I looked everywhere for my keys, but I left them in the room, so I got out my phone and began to text one of my roommates. And the conversation went something like this. "Hey, I'm back at the hotel, but the doors are locked. I thought that you guys said you would be in." "You're in the hotel?" Yeah, but I don't have my keys. When are you guys back?" "Dude, you have to get out of there, now." "What? Why? Just get out." At this point, I started receiving messages from the other students telling me to get out and it's not safe. I was so confused, and for a minute I thought it was just a big joke. But then I got one of the most terrifying phone calls of my life. One of the lecturers at the college who came on the exchange phoned me. He told me that the hotel had been evacuated because a guy staying on the other side of the hotel was running around with a handmade knife trying to attack students, which meant that the whole hotel was empty, apart from me and this crazy person. At that point, reality hit hard. I was trapped on the top floor and I couldn't even lock myself in my room. I had to make my way back down and out quickly, so I hung up and I started to move. The hotel had no elevator, so I slowly made my way around, listening for any sounds, peeking my head around corners to make sure it was safe. My adrenaline was super high and every creak of the floor made me grit my teeth. By the time I made it to the stairs, I felt sick with fear. I stopped caring about making noises eventually and just started running down the stairs. I just wanted to get out of there, and I felt like it was taking hours just to clear a single flight. Eventually, I got to the first floor and could see the reception area. Freedom from this nightmare was so close. However, as I made my way down, somebody walked around the corner, stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I noticed the figure and I stopped dead in my tracks. It was a middle-aged man with short dark hair, topless, covered in what looked like oil or grease or something, holding in his hand a filthy rag covering something underneath it. As he turned his hand slowly, I saw the handle, and it was a knife. We locked eyes, and my blood ran ice cold. I wanted to run, but fear glued me in place. 1,000 scenarios ran through my head at once. What if he charges at me? What if he gets to me? What should I do? We just keep staring at each other, though. Someone's got to make the first move in this situation, and I guess it's got to be me. I have to get the upper hand, right? So, what do you think I did? Out of all the options I had and the situations I was in, I did the first thing that came into my head. I smiled, looked at him dead in the eyes, and said in the most friendly voice that I could manage, "Hello, nice day, huh?" Silence. He said nothing. A second later, he started slowly walking up the stairs. I stood dead still and never took my eyes off him, and he kept his head down and started mumbling something to himself. As he walked past me, I could smell the body odor and booze off of him too, and he rounded the corner, and at that point, I ran. I bolted through the reception and burst out the front entrance. To my right, the street was completely empty, and to my left, a large crowd of people staring at me in disbelief. Just a few meters away from me, one of the lecturers had his back pressed to the hotel's wall. He told me to come quickly, and I made my way into the crowd where I found all the students and guests gathered. After that, we waited for the man to be escorted out by police, and all of us grabbed our things, and we found a much nicer and safer hotel for the rest of the trip. I was later told that a few of the crowd saw me walk in and were actually calling to me. I didn't hear or see them because, well, I stupidly had my earphones in and was staring at my phone. I can only imagine the panic that they must have gone into, and the shock to see me run out like that. For some reason, I never told my fellow students or lecturers what happened, but when they asked, I just said that I didn't see the guy. For the rest of the trip, the guy in the hotel was nicknamed the Mad Stabber, and I didn't sleep very well for the rest of the trip. So this memory has stayed with me since it happened, in what has to be somewhere close to a decade ago now, because I was probably about 9. It was a completely normal day, and then I go to sleep. I wake up in the middle of the night, though, despite normally being a heavy sleeper. I don't know why, too, but I immediately decide that moving even an inch would be a terrible idea, so I stay still and shut my eyes tight. I still don't know why, but then I feel something. You know how you can kind of feel what's happening around you, even if you're not looking, as long as you're paying close enough attention? Well, imagine that, except amplified by about 400%. I could feel 2 presents in my room. Not near my door, but right next to my window on the opposite side of the room. I kept my eyes shut tight, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway because it was as dark as could be. After remaining near my window for however long, I began to feel like they knew that I was awake too. Then they started moving over to me. I can see their exact path that they took through my room in my mind, based on what I felt. They both stand right in front of my bed. I'm laying on my side facing toward them. The one closer to my head bends down and gets near my face. I don't hear anything, but I can only feel them. They stay like this for another short while, and I'm panicking beyond belief, concentrating on keeping my mind in check so I can stay alive. I pray to God that they just go away, and then peace. I have no idea what happened after that. I don't even remember waking up, despite the memory of the encounter, and the peace that followed it being extremely vivid. I had ruled it off as demons initially, as that falls in line with my beliefs, but after reading a few other encounters, I don't know what to think anymore. I would not believe in aliens if not for this experience too, and these next ones. So, the same year, perhaps 5 months before or 5 months after, I can't really remember. I was taking out the trash, and once I got to the end of my driveway and dropped off the cans, we had a really long driveway. I looked up to search for the 2 dippers, as I always like to do, and didn't expect to see about 5 shapes just hovering in the air. One of them, which took up about a 1/12 of the circumference of the sky, if that makes sense, was composed of 4 bright lights assembling what was perhaps a trapezoid-esque shape. It was emitting what appeared to be similar to a headlight on a car, I suppose, except huge, of course. It was stationary and revealed no stars behind it. To the right, there were 2 big, bright stationary lights. Seemed more like individual ships, maybe. Much larger than the stars, though. Between them, too, was a moving assembly of 3 red lights forming a perfect triangle, heading up, I guess. It almost looked like it was following the 5th entity, which I think was just one of 4 satellites, maybe. It was small, fast, and zipping on by. I would have thought the triangle could have been an aeroplane, of course, but it just looked way too big for how it was moving and how far away it appeared to be. I've seen this triangular ship 2 other times as well. Once I was even with other people, though it was too fast for anyone else to see it. We were in a moving car and it went out of view. I still have no explanations for these events, only the vivid memories and assurance that I didn't dream these events up. On top of these experiences too, I also noticed another similarity between me and people who claim to have been abducted. It's a strange fascination, almost obsession I guess, with aliens when they were younger, which suddenly stopped, at least for a while. I have also felt that odd sensation that many others have expressed when certain things are shown or brought up. You begin shaking and quivering and tearing up. You don't know why, but you know that you just have to get away from what triggered it, which in my case is 100% every time related to aliens being shown or discussed in media. It doesn't happen every time aliens are brought up, but when it happens, it's always when aliens are brought up, if that makes sense. But anyway, am I blowing this out of proportion, or Is my experience similar to anyone else's? I would love to know if you guys would like to leave a comment. I moved around a lot when I was younger, and some houses were just sort of naturally creepy, while others were just mundane. I always chalked it up to the openness of floor plans and the availability of natural light. Basements, for instance, are just kind of creepy, you know? I never worried too much about it though, because whenever the house we were living in that year had a basement, it was generally finished and felt more like a slightly darker ground floor than a proper basement. Ironically enough, too, the creepiest house that I ever lived in had an amazingly open floor plan and ample natural light. So in the late 2010s, my family moved to Georgia. It was a small halfway suburb and halfway country town to the east of Atlanta. It's where Road Atlanta is if there are any motorsports fans here. We found a big late 90s house for pretty cheap because the housing market was still pretty bad. 3 levels, huge bedrooms, all of their own bathrooms, hardwood, finished basement, all of the McMansion fixings. We were told that for once that we'd be living there for a while too. My older sister and I were just about to start high school, and my dad didn't want to move us around during that time of our lives. The house was built on a slight hill, so the basement was the ground floor on one side and underground on the other. On one end of the basement, there was a large bedroom with a door leading outside. This was my bedroom. Directly across from the door into the house was a room, probably 25 feet by 12 feet, I'd say, with no windows or interesting features, which we decided to use just as storage. This room had no door, just an opening to the rest of the fairly open basement. Towards the stairs, which more or less marked the midpoint of the basement, and off to the left was a series of 3 rooms. The central room, which connected to the rest of the basement via a regular door, was small, but it was finished. The other 2, however, they weren't finished. One was your standard stud and slab basement room where the fuse box, the water heater, etc. were. The other had thick concrete walls and a ceiling made from corrugated steel, laid across a few steel beams. I always figured it was just a tornado shelter or something. Past the stairs, where a bar that was never used, not once in the years that we lived there, was a similarly disused home theatre and a game room. These 3 won't really be relevant, because most of the story takes place between my bedroom and the stairs. So, it took me a while to realise that the uneasy feeling I had in the house wasn't because I didn't really want to move back east. We had spent the last 18 months in the foothills of the Nevadas, and it was quite fun. I had more or less grown up in the southeast and wasn't super thrilled to be there again. Everything was quiet for the first year or so that we lived there too, but then I started to get more comfortable spending time alone at night in the living room that we had set up down in the basement, playing Xbox or doing whatever else a 13-year-old boy with nothing to do does at night. But I started noticing sounds of shifting just every now and then. Maybe once every couple of months or so, I'd hear a noise from behind me, in the big storage closet, which sounded like something rubbing against a box, or possibly moving a lightly filled box across the carpet. Sometimes, it'd be a slight knock or a creak like a door hinge. I never thought too hard on it, because what could it have been? Something actually in there, or the mind of a 13-year-old looking for sounds to hear? I mean, houses make noise, I thought. It went on like that for a while too, until one night I had my dog down there with me and she perked up at the noise. And I realized then that it couldn't have been my imagination, unless I had a telepathic link with my dog or something. It obviously wasn't that though, so I went into the storage room to have a look, but I didn't find anything amiss. Time went on and sounds happened every now and again with varying frequency, but then I started to hear the stairs creak at night. Never the whole flight, and not very frequently, but it was pretty clear. The bottom few steps were not carpeted, but the rest were, so you could tell the directionality of someone using them based on whether the sound went from wood to carpet or carpet to wood. And there was the clear but quiet sound of wood to carpet every now and then. Sometimes it was at night, and sometimes in the middle of the day. But what's more, too, is that I wasn't the only one who heard it. My mum would ask why I was sneaking upstairs in the middle of the night when I never really had any reason to, and obviously I never did. Now one day, I was upstairs home alone on a Saturday and clearly heard what I could have sworn was my younger brother who was definitely not home with me, call out, "Mum," from somewhere in the basement. It was slightly muffled, but definitely from inside the house. And that was the first time that I'd heard something that I couldn't just explain as the house shifting. Over the years we lived there, I heard my mum and my dog's name called out a few more times, and always from downstairs. Sometime after this, the dog started to get locked in weird places around the house when we left too. Sometimes it was in the laundry room where her food and water dishes were, and sometimes in a bathroom upstairs, but once in the movie room, which we generally kept closed to prevent her from going in and laying down on the recliners in there, and once in the finished room between the tornado shelter and the utility closet. But she wasn't just closed in. The door had a lock and it was locked. These were push locks too, not toggle locks like most houses have. If you lock the door while it's open and then close it, it will unlock itself. But these doors were locked and needed to be opened with a key or screwdriver. And last time I checked, pugs can't really reach doorknobs. At first we thought that it was my youngest brother, but he was with us every time and couldn't have locked the doors from the outside. So now I'm hearing stuff shifting, names being called, the stairs sounding like someone's walking partway up them, and my dog is getting locked in odd rooms while we're all out. This was probably around the 4th year that we lived in that house. I was getting pretty tired of living in that basement. Fortunately though, when my sister moved off to college, I was allowed to take her old room on the top floor. A little while after changing rooms, my family all went on a week-long vacation without me. I had a job, a car to use, and I'm not that big on beaches, especially not those in Georgia, so I was fine to have a staycation away from my family. However, again at night, I heard a new sound, soft footsteps from the top of the basement stairs to the doorway of the master bedroom. The first 2 nights this happened, and they happened every night after the second night my family was away. I grabbed my gun and a flashlight and checked it out, making sure all the windows and the doors were locked. We didn't have a security system, so it was entirely possible for a door to be opened on the other end of the house, completely unbeknownst to me. Remember too that there were exterior doors in the basement. However, everything was locked up tight. The second to last night though, at the end of the footsteps path, I heard a door close. I didn't go to check that one out though, and I also didn't tell my parents about that. It was a year later too that I was moving out to college, so my family decided that they would finally answer my dad's employer's constant demands for relocation, and the house was being cleaned up to show and sell. They moved out into an extended stay, on my dad's company's dime, so as not to disturb the realtor's careful placement of furniture and whatnot. They got a few notices though from the realtor that physical, slightly dirty footprints were showing up on bath mats, like someone who wasn't exactly clean was stepping out of the showers. They put up a nanny cam too to see if someone was sneaking in, but they didn't find anything. After a while though, shower curtains were being torn down. During this period, there was a lot of stuff stored in the basement, and I had need for an old dog kennel since I had adopted a dog of my own to keep me company at college, so I came over on a day that there were no showings and went into the storage room and grabbed it. On the way back up the stairs, I heard a door open somewhere behind me, and that was the last time that I ever entered that house. My mum says that on the day that they were moving everything out, she and my dad were going room to room checking to see if anything had been left behind, but they were just leaving through the foyer, and my mum to this day will swear that she heard someone laugh in the basement. She said that it sounded like me. My dad says that he didn't hear anything, and that was pretty much that. To be honest with you guys, I really don't know what to think. I've never been too certain on the possibility of the paranormal, but I've never been too closed off to it either. There are too many weird things that happened in that house and have never happened since for me to say that it was just a trick of my mind. But what could really be going on with a house that young? Are haunts known to progress slowly like that? But we lived there for almost 6 years, and this is all there is to say. No huge weird event, just a series of really creepy noises and really strange events. Like I said, I really don't know what to think about it, but maybe you guys have some ideas as to what the deal was with that house. I love waking up in the dark and walking the sunrise with my dogs. I didn't intend to own 2 huskies and a German Shepherd mix, but they each found me and I couldn't turn them away. We usually jog about 5 miles a day, often in the neighborhood. But nearly as often, I load us up in the van and drive 10 minutes to the wooded metro park. I really love it there. They offer some trails that allow quads and motorbikes, some bicycles and skis, some just people, and last year they opened a new one that allows pets. It's a 5-mile loop into the area farthest from the city. We live on the northern edge of our town, but in the dark with no leaves on the trees, you can clearly see the red glow of the CVS sign for most of the hike. These are tamed woods with asphalt paths, concrete fire pits, rangers patrolling regularly, and the hospital behind CVS means that there's emergency medical care in walking distance. I was up coughing again in the night. I had a serious case of pneumonia 2 months ago and was not fully recovered when this sinus infection hit me. I'm past the fever part, so we're walking, not yet jogging again, but after being up in the night, I didn't get up in time to go walk before I dropped my kids off at school. Then my youngest had an appointment, and then I had to run a few errands, and then we had unexpected visitors right after school, and then they stayed for dinner, and finally I got the dogs into the van, and we made it to the park just before it started to get dark. I was irritated at all the little things that had kept me from my walk all day, but as we drove all the way to the back of the park, I realized that we'd be walking the sunset, watching it over the lake and the hills and through the bare trees. The park was clearing out now as it started towards dark. We would very nearly have the place to ourselves and might not have to pull off the path to let others pass us. There is an amazing number of people who are afraid of dogs that hike the pet path. Anyway, all those little irritations had led to this singular moment of beauty I would not otherwise have seen and appreciated. And this was going to be a really good walk. It's funny how life works out when you kind of let it. So, I parked in my spot at the farthest end of the parking lot by the bathrooms. A mile-long people, or walkers or joggers only, path looped through the woods and by the lake and came out by the bathrooms. I actually liked to run it when I came here alone. It was a glorious walk through a Bob Ross painting. My mind cleared and my thoughts quieted, and I simply experienced the woods. My feet on the path, my dogs panting, the nature sounds, the beauty of the sky. I absolutely loved it. About halfway now, and the city sounds had faded away until I could only hear the birds and the frogs. Insects, too, all singing their songs of territory and mating and life, but then a crack. And then utter silence and absolute stillness. My dogs and I turned instantly towards the source of the sound and froze. Behind us and to the right, the sound had come to the crest of a hill. I couldn't see anything and heard only the dogs panting. So I waited for the nature sounds to return, but they didn't. All 3 of the dogs slowly raised their ruffs, first standing on end all around their shoulders and necks, tails held tall and proud, making themselves look larger and more threatening. I took a step towards them, and the female husky, the leader of my little pack, instantly put her ears back and her head down and pulled me down the path. All 3 of them left their tails and ruffs up, but the 2 males also put their ears back and heads down and began to pull me. So off we went. But the woods was still dead silent. I thought to myself, we must have startled a buck on the slope of the hill, not seen him, and after we passed, he leapt up the hill and jumped a dead tree, and his hoof hit a dead branch, and the branch broke, and that was what the crack sound was and why everyone was scared. But why were the woods still silent? Maybe there's someone up there. I mean, homeless people must stay here sometimes. The bathrooms have the heat, so the pipes don't freeze. This is about as far as the path goes. It would be a good place to sleep. Maybe he's just setting up a shelter and the crack was just a broken branch. But again, why are the woods still silent? We were about as far from the city as you could get in these woods, and you couldn't see the CVS sign or the glow from the streetlights or even hear the traffic noises. It was dark and still and absolutely quiet, except for the panting of dogs and 4 sets of footsteps on the path. I wanted to run. The dogs wanted to run too. I kept thinking to myself, is it a Bigfoot? That must have been a Bigfoot breaking a log to say get out. But there are no Bigfoot in city limits, I promise you that. It must have been a deer, and the woods are still quiet because of us. I have 200 pounds of dog here. Yes, they're the big huskies, and another 200 pounds on me. Yeah, I'm a little overweight, but I've got a bit of muscle underneath it. I have broad shoulders and big hands, and we are the scariest thing in these woods. There's no bears, no wolves, no Bigfoot. There are deer and there are foxes, and there might be an angry raccoon, but we're the biggest and baddest, scariest thing in these woods. That is, unless there's someone with a gun. That's not helping. I need to stop thinking this way. The dogs had not stopped once to sniff or mark, heads down, ears back, tails and ruffs still held high, and they just wanted to go. Well, we'd gone almost a mile now, me craning my head the whole time, trying to see as far as I could in all directions while letting the dogs pull me down the path, and it was still absolutely silent. There was not an overflying goose, not a cricket, nothing moved and nothing made a sound, except us, of course. Here came the third and the longest of the 3 steep hills on this trail. I'd been running these to rebuild my strength and endurance, but if I ran at this point, I'd be blown at the top. The top where it curved around as it crested, you couldn't see anything past the thick trees. The top where, if you were deeper in the woods, you could follow a more gradual ridge up to the crest of the hill and wait, unseen, for someone to come up the path. Was it a deer, or was it an ambush? Should I turn around? No, it was just a deer. But what if it's behind us? What if it is an ambush? Or what if it is someone with a gun? What if it's Bigfoot? It has to have been a deer. And this is why I end up running. The noise in my head is just unbearable otherwise. Up the hill, walk, pay attention, watch the dogs. The dogs were still on alert, but didn't hesitate to go up the hill. In fact, they wanted to go faster. I kept saying to myself, just walk, don't get smoked. Be able to run or fight if you have to. Yeah, okay, I'm scared. The woods should still not be this silent. The dogs should not still be on alert, and it's not a cat or a bear or a wolf, and I really doubt it's a Bigfoot, but it could definitely be a person. So, let's be smart. Just walk. We're not good prey. The dogs will protect me. The huskies might not, alone, but the shepherd will, and they'll follow his lead. Be smart and get out. It's only another mile now to the lake and the first parking lot, then another half-mile along the lake to the second lot where my van was. Hearing traffic noises now, but still no birds, no crickets and no frogs. And the smell almost stopped me dead in my tracks. But the dogs just kept pulling. It was sour and grassy and oddly metallic and fecal. There was crap and blood and partially digested grass maybe. I smelled the contents of a deer stomach, I think, which meant that someone had hunted these woods, and the dogs were not at all interested in the smell. And so we ran again. I don't remember much of that last mile, but we just ran. Desna, the big female husky, finally stopped to drink some lake water as we came out by the parking lot. Then she began to sniff and pee. The boys followed her lead. There was a single truck parked, and I relaxed quite a bit, but still felt a bit on edge. Down the lake in the next parking lot, I could see headlights. They must be parked at the turnaround at the end of the lot closest to the lake. Their headlights illuminated the lakeside path, and that's when I realized that they were watching us. Halfway to the van now, and the car drove away. 20 feet from the van, and I heard a motor coming down the nearest path. I decided to put the dogs in the car on the driver's side instead of the passenger side like normal. The sound of the motor came closer. The leashes caught on the armrest, and I had to untangle them before the dogs could jump into the van. The motor came closer down the path. I had to be gone before it came out. I just knew it with an absolute certainty. Finally, though, the dogs were in, and I slammed the door and jumped in the front, fumbling for the lock button, shaking hands unclipping the keys from my jogging belt, starting the car and gunning it into reverse. And as my headlights swept over the entrance of the path by the bathrooms, they lit up a four-wheeler coming out of the woods. I was dropping the transmission into drive and hitting the gas, and as my brain processed what my eyes saw, it informed me that there was something across the handlebars. Was it a gun? A deer carcass? I couldn't tell, and because of the angle when pulling away, I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror. but I was pretty sure that it was a gun. And so, I guess the question is, were we the ones being hunted? So this is my first time sharing this story, and I have a question. Am I being followed by something? Let me elaborate. For the past 2 nights, strange noises and occurrences have been happening around me, always at 2:30, but at 2 separate locations, which is why I believe that I'm being followed by something. I'm a strong believer in the paranormal, and have had experiences in the past, but this just feels different. Anyway, I'll just get to the experiences. So, the first incident happened on Tuesday night, April 2nd at around 2:30. I was on a 24-hour CQ shift, standing guard at a barracks to make sure people don't mess around too much. It was all quiet until this point that I started hearing whistling in the hallways. Now, the desk I sit at has view of both wings of the barracks, and I can see straight down each of them without much effort. And I see no one. So I begin to walk the halls and see if it's someone whistling loudly in their rooms or something. I pinpoint the whistling, but it's coming from a locked room. I believe it's a janitor closet or something. I thought it was just my mind playing games, so I went back to my desk. As I went back, I passed by the day room and witnessed the door to the day room closed when it had been propped open by a dumbbell. I started freaking out a bit over this, and I went to the door to reopen it. When I got to the door, I looked into the day room, and I see the little soccer dudes on the football table spin, as if someone ran up to spin them and vanished. I'm extremely freaked out now and head back to my desk to gather my thoughts when I heard the sound of doors being slammed in both halls, except none of the doors were opening or looked to have been closing. And after that, nothing. Just one wild-eyed me sitting at my desk till 9 a.m. So that was the first incident, but the second one happened last night at my girlfriend's place. I was staying the night and had went to bed early so that I could be at work at 600 for PT. I'm usually a deep sleeper, but for some reason I woke up at around 2:30 again this morning to the sound of light knocking at the bedroom door. She has a nightlight out in the hall, and I could see something or someone blocking the light, as if a person was in front of the door, and after a few seconds, the figure moved out from the doorframe, and I heard footsteps going down the stairs. Well, again, trying to remain calmish, I thought I'd been a dumbass and left the door unlocked and maybe someone was sneaking about. So I grab her bat that she keeps under her bed to go check if someone had broken in. I walk downstairs and check all the locks and the windows, and they're definitely all locked. I start freaking out again and was about to head back upstairs when I heard a soft whisper of my girlfriend's name. I stand on edge and then hear what sounds like long scratching on the basement door, which is underneath her staircase, I think. At this point, I nope the heck out of there and head back upstairs, where I remained awake until I had to leave to go to PT. Now, I'm sitting here confused and a little on edge as I believe something has attached itself and is potentially following me. To add more reasons to why I think that it could be paranormal too, the night before it happened, a buddy of mine in the same building used a Ouija board, and I have a feeling that he didn't close it properly and maybe it attached itself to me. So I'll ask the same question to you guys. Am I being followed, or is it just a spooky coincidence? Other than that, I have no other theory to go off of, so if anyone has any theories or suggestions on what I might be able to do, then please do help. I used to live in a seaside town in California. Living there most of my life, I had seen a lot of strange people, but never really had a bad experience until the story that I'm about to tell. Perhaps it was because we were young that we never paid attention to the things around us. The things were probably happening, but we never saw the horrors of our town. All I know is that we felt safe all the time, even though we probably shouldn't have. So, I was 14 and both of my friends were the same age. One of my friends, Sarah, had been my best friend for 4 years prior and is still my best friend today, even after 14 long years. My other friend Alice had known me for only a year or two prior and was kind of new to our shenanigans, but fit in all the same. You see, me and my best friend Sarah had been avid role players since the day that we'd met. I remember all the recesses that we spent in elementary school pretending the play structures were castles and that dragons resided in them. When we met Alice, we introduced her to this, and she fell in love almost instantly. All of us had created a world where we could be anyone and pretty much do anything. As time had gone on, we began LARPing by dressing up in capes and costumes as the characters that we'd created. We even collected sticks that we swung around and sword fought with, accidentally ending a few times in bruises and scrapes. Role-playing had become a large part of our friendship, and even now we still partake in some of this, but as life goes, when you grow up, you rarely find the time to do things like this, right? Back then, though, whenever we could, we would band together and go on our own adventure, but time was always limited unless we had a sleepover together at one of our houses. Most of the time, though, we would all just stay at my place. I think why we chose to be at my place so often was because of the freedom that we had there too. My father wasn't a terrible father, but he wasn't the most traditional parent either. He let me and my friends pretty much do whatever we chose to do as long as we weren't getting ourselves into trouble. Because of this, we would walk around at night a lot because, well, it was quiet and the streets were mostly empty of people. Many of our role-playing sessions mostly took place after dark for years without incident. I mean, sure, my friends' parents didn't really like it when they realized that we'd been doing this, but we had done it anyway. At the time, we had specific places that we designated for perfect RP session spots when we didn't feel like wandering. One of them had been the park near my apartment. This park, when you walked into it, had a hill with a walkway that led down into a sandy play area below. This play area had swings, a slide, and some upright pipe-looking things that looked like they could have been from Mario, but blue. But the one thing that I always thought was strange about this play area was the giant cement sculpture that was meant to be climbed on and inside of. This sculpture had holes all over the place, even ones on the bottom where you could climb up underneath it. It kind of reminded me of one of those sculptures that Delia Dietz had in Beetlejuice. Lastly, beyond that playground, down a little hill, it flattened out into a field. Now, this field was huge, and it had a bathroom all the way at the other end, opposite from the park, and was big enough that it contained 2 baseball diamonds. Because of the baseball areas, there were cages above the pitcher's mound, and the entire field was fenced on one side. The path that led to the play area continued on the other side of this fence, and the field was on the other. So, as you could probably tell, this was a role-player's perfect spot to just go all out, especially with LARPing. And when it was at night, when no one was around, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted without being looked at funny or being told not to flail giant sticks around. So, one crisp night, we 3 girls had a sleepover at my place, and we decided that that night was a great time to go out and adventure. We threw on our capes and grabbed our sticks that I kept near my front door, and we headed out to that grand old park. It had already been dark at the time, the street lamps glowing with their eerie golden glow above as we had made our way to the park, which had only been about 2 blocks away. When we reached the park, we made our way down the path while we excitedly talked about our game. I remember as we approached the top of the hill that overlooked the play area that I had the feeling that we just weren't alone. But we continued into the park anyway, making our way down the hill. A moment after, I felt uneasy though, and we noticed that we really weren't alone. Seeing the strange sculpture above on the walkway, we had seen a dark silhouette of a man sitting inside. This person looked large compared to us, and they certainly weren't giving off any good vibes. Although they weren't really doing anything. Because of this, though, we decided to bypass the park and continue on through the giant grass field. At this point, all 3 of us continued on talking about our game, and we didn't think anything of it. I mean, this park often had teenagers messing around at night drinking and stuff, or the random homeless person just trying to sleep or take a break, so it wasn't really a big deal. We had already made it about halfway across the large dark field when I had this nagging feeling to look behind us. I turned and saw the dark figure of the man that we saw in the sculpture, making his way down the small grassy hill onto the field. I told them both what was happening, and they too looked behind, seeing the man walking. It was at that point that we all started to get uneasy too. It was at this point that I just hoped that he had happened to be walking in the same direction, that this guy just then decided to get going somewhere for some reason, but nothing about it really felt that way, especially when the silhouette's pace began to quicken. With how rigid this man walked and the strides that he took, he seemed like he could have been on drugs and looking to possibly start trouble. He looked like he could start charging at us at any moment. Thoughts of this guy mugging us or sexually assaulting us flooded my brain, but I tried to reassure myself that this guy would be really stupid attacking 3 girls, especially when they all had sticks the size of Gandalf's staff. We kept walking in the direction of the bathroom and decided among ourselves that we would stop at a picnic table not too far from it. I honestly don't remember why we decided to do this. I think we were just trying to pretend that we didn't notice this guy and play it cool or something. Or maybe it was because we wanted to be ready and face this guy if he wanted to start something. Either way, the bench was sitting directly under one of the streetlights, so we were in direct view of anyone who could have been watching what might take place. Whatever it had been, though, this was our plan. So we kept looking behind us, and the man was getting closer and closer, gaining on us now. This bench wasn't much further, but it had felt like we were walking across a huge expanse. And although it was dark, we could see him doing something with one of his hands. At the time, I'm pretty sure I was afraid of him having a weapon, but as he got closer, I started to get the picture of what he might have been doing. At this, we sped up our pace a bit, rounded out of the open gate on the fence, and made it to the bench. We quickly swiveled and sat on the bench so that we were facing this guy, and he made it to the gate and stopped at the opening. Now illuminated by the streetlight, we could see him, and he was playing with himself. He was tall, thin, and was also completely bald. This guy had a blank 1,000-mile stare, and although this guy was touching himself, his eyes just flashed murderously. This guy was most definitely tweaked out and thinking about doing something bad. Of that, I'm sure. But to our relief, the crazy pervert stood there for a minute looking at us and then just disappeared back into the darkness towards the playground. We waited for a while until we saw the guy disappearing out of the park, up the road, and far away before we moved from the bench. I could tell that all of us were uncomfortable and kind of freaked out about what had happened, but we just kind of kept making jokes about it to ease our minds. We joked about how he was rolling dice very intensely because he wanted to play an RPG with us or something. Yeah, we were kind of messed up kids, and we were fully aware of what happened, but we just didn't take it very seriously. After that, though, we decided to go back to my place because none of us felt like it was worth sticking around after that. Plus, the mood was just utterly ruined now, and none of our parents heard about it after it happened, though, and things went on as normal. We started to go to the park less at night, though, and it never really felt the same after that. We talked about it now and again, but over time we just put it out of our minds. I remember for the longest time, though, that we kind of just normalized it, and in my mind it kind of set off this as not being that big of a deal. Nothing happened, you know. But even then, and after all those jokes that we made, looking back on it, it was pretty messed up. How we took it and what that guy did and how stupid we were was just no laughing matter. But thank God that we had those sticks, because who knows what the heck could have happened and what he could have done to us. It's definitely scarier now to me than it was at the time that it happened. To this day, I've never had another experience like that and have moved away from my childhood home. And I hope that I never have to go through anything like that again. I worked at Six Flags last spring and summer, and well, technically, a freelance arts company leasing vending spots there, but I was one of the oldest people hired. I was 18 at the time, attending college, while most of my co-workers were in high school. I took photos in a sort of old-timey dress-up shop. It was honestly one of the most fun jobs I'd ever had. I was hired back in March of 2018 and started work in April, when the park was open on weekends, only before the official opening. I'd been working there for about a month, and the park was now open during the week for less than 10 hours per day, so I was able to work all day, but was unfortunately the only one in the shop as college was on summer break and high school was still in session until mid-June. And You can probably see where this story is going. So, I was alone all day during the week and had some co-workers on the weekends. I was so terribly alone during the day that I'd walk across the path to go see my other co-worker out of boredom. But when I was outside of my shop during the day, I began to notice a man hanging around my area. I'd mainly see him walk by very slowly, staring at me, and I presumed my shop the whole time. I figured he was just shy, wanting a picture inside, and was too afraid or socially awkward to ask for pricing. Deep down, though, he did give me an uneasy feeling, but I decided to ignore it because he was a customer in the park and was probably just very antisocial. I kept a smile, though, and I tried pulling in customers all day every day. But one day I smiled and waved at him, and that was a very big mistake. He walked over briskly to stand in front of me and stare at me, and I was really creeped out by this. I was scared, but he then asked about prices, after days of walking by me and staring, mind you, and I breathed a sigh of relief and started going through my memorized sales pitches. After I finished, he started to smile. Not a normal smile, mind you, but one that made my skin crawl. He leaned in so close that I could smell his breath. He asked how much it would be for him, and I was confused. I'd just gone through my price list, so I stated that prices were set and non-negotiable unless you were an art company employee or a park employee or something. And at this, he just kind of shrugged and walked off. When I ran through my pitch, a family had grown interested and wanted some pictures, so I gladly took them into the shop and had a wonderful time photographing them. While I was checking the family out and collecting payment, I looked up and the man was back, leaning against the chain barrier in front of my shop. The family collected their things and walked to the chain. The man had to move to the side for me to open it for them, and I immediately closed it behind them as he tried pushing his way into the shop. I told him that I was sorry, but only paying customers could come in, and he wasn't allowed in unless he was considering a purchase. And at this, he frowned and walked away again. I waited a few minutes, and I tidied up the shop and stepped back outside. It was almost closing time, so it was pointless, but I had to stand outside or else I'd get in trouble with my boss. And I noticed him one last time that day. Across the way from me was a game, and I saw him hiding behind it, peeking his head out and just looking at me. And I can't tell you just how scared I was because I honestly just wanted to cry. But he continued to do this for the entire week, and I eventually just began to ignore him, which he did not like one bit. On that Friday, as soon as the park opened, he made a beeline towards me. I was out front organising outdoor props, and I froze. I hastily dropped what I was doing and just went inside, closing the chain behind me. He paced back and forth in front of the chain, muttering to himself and just kind of looking at me, and I was terrified at this point. I was going to run to the phone to call security if he didn't leave, and he suddenly lurched forward, grabbing the chain in both of his hands, and I'll never forget this moment because my heart dropped and my blood just ran cold. His eyes were just wild, and that same menacing grin was back. And then he started whispering about things that he wanted me to do to him, and it was disgusting and not worth repeating. But he was talking about how he loved me and all these sexual things that he wanted to do to me. He wanted to put me into a dress and said that he wanted me to humiliate him in front of all the people in the park. I was slowly backing up to the wall in my shop as he started yelling and laughing at this point. I told him to go away, that I would call security if he didn't leave me right away, but he got even more angry and said something that keeps me up at night, even a year later. He said, "I'll be waiting for you when you get out. Meet me by the employee exit on your way out, or else." He gave me that disgusting smile again and then just walked away. I went behind the counter and I just started sobbing, and I never imagined I'd have something like this happen to me. And now that it had, all of my knowledge of what to do just went out the window. And I'm ashamed to say that I honestly just cried like a little girl. I decided to tell my manager at the end of the day because I didn't want to be afraid of coming to work. When I told him, he was mortified that I hadn't told him sooner. He walked me to a secret exit to the employee parking lot so I wouldn't see the man, and the next morning we went to the security office and I gave a description to all the park security of what he looked like and what he normally would wear. I went back to my shop with 2 co-workers, and not even 5 minutes later, here he came, strolling over with an angry look on his face. I hadn't met him the day before, and boy, was he furious. My co-workers noticed my panic as I ran and hid in the back. I hadn't told them about my situation yet, and when I did, they told me that they wouldn't leave me alone ever after their shift was over. I called security and told them what he was wearing, and so they updated the information, and they posted a security officer outside of my shop. He seemed to disappear because of that, and when the officer left to take care of something, he just came straight back. Security soon realized that every time a clothes officer was around, he would hide, so they posted a plainclothes officer across my shop posing as a customer. In other words, I was being used as a bait, ultimately, but I felt it was important to get him out of the park, so I complied. Security eventually apprehended him later that day as he was headed towards my shop. They asked me for identification on him, and I remember breaking down and just sobbing. But the officer comforted me, and finally this nightmare was over, though. He never physically threatened me or wielded a weapon or anything, but he was doing enough verbal threats to make me fear for my life. But they banned him from all Six Flag parks around the country, revoked his membership status, and took him into custody. Unfortunately, as there was no violence committed, they had to let him go, though. As I drove home that night, I saw him walking on the side of the road, and I immediately sped away in fear that he would see me through the window and chase me or something. But at least he couldn't get me at work anymore, right? I found out a couple of weeks later from one of my security friends that he saw my stalker being arrested in a town over. I went and looked up arrest records for that town later in the day and saw that he'd been arrested for indecent exposure, public endangerment, and public intoxication. All I can say in the end is that I'm glad that he was arrested, and you really don't think something like this will happen to you until it just does. So please, everyone, always be careful about who's around you at all times, and always be cautious. So I've had a handful of paranormal encounters. Now that I'm older, they have really stopped, and this happened when I was around 21, 22. I'm 30 now. So I rented a room in a 2-story house at my friend's house in the 2nd story. I had a female boxer dog that would sleep with me in the room too. I had one window that would face the neighborhood street. One night, my dog jumped on my bed, blocking my view from my TV. I tried to move her with my feet, but she wouldn't budge. She kept a low growl facing my window, and since she didn't want to move, I turned off my TV and I just went to sleep. But she just kept growling. I don't know what time it was later, but I woke up to a very, very bright light shooting through my blinds. I instantly became annoyed and got up to see which car had the headlights on so bright that it was coming into my bedroom. Mind you, I'd never experienced this level of brightness before. So I got up and I put my fingers through the blinds to open them up, and then after that, everything just went blank. Now, I remember opening my eyes and walking inside a type of room of some sort. The room was metallic with no seams, just perfectly curved metal. In front of me was a perfectly metallic bed. It was just a metal rectangle in a grey colour, and behind me I could sense that there were things guiding me to this metal bed. We were communicating, but not through speaking. We were kind of talking through our minds or something, and I could tell that they were just trying to guide me to the metallic bed in the middle of the room. I remember standing right in front of the metallic bed-like thing, and just like that, I was back in my bedroom. I remember standing in my room, but this time with my back facing my window. I stumbled around my room because I was really dizzy, and I remember knocking down some furniture, but finally making it to my bed. The next morning, I woke up. I actually didn't remember any of this. This all came to me later. I woke up feeling extremely sick in my stomach, though, and I just wanted to throw up. I stumbled down the stairs because I was also extremely hungry. I got the milk out of the fridge and was getting ready to pour it into the box of cereal. I stopped myself, though, and went over to the sink, which faces the backyard. And that was when I saw my dog running around the backyard. The dog who should still have been in my room. That was when it all hit me too. All the memories came back, and I ran up the stairs as fast as I could to look at the condition of my room, and the furniture was thrown around everywhere. This was around winter time, so it got cold and I would sleep with 3 blankets. And strangely enough, all 3 blankets were formed into a perfect spiral type design on my bed. I went to the spirals and destroyed them since I couldn't believe what had happened. I was scared, if I'm being honest. And something changed inside me after that day. I don't know what the right word is, but dumber in a sense. I had speech problems in which I would stutter after every other word. I also couldn't comprehend what I was reading unless I read it slowly 3 to 4 times. I just knew that something happened that night. It wasn't until almost a year later that I was in my room just chilling in my bed. I was at the house alone since my roommate was working, and once again a bright light shot through my room, but this time the house began to rumble. It literally felt like an earthquake had struck, and fear struck down my body since I already knew what the light was all about. But this time, the light just went away. The rumbling only lasted for about 5 seconds, and everything was gone. And after that day, I regained my reading and speaking levels. It all just went back to normal. And that was definitely the weirdest moment in my entire life. Back in 2016, I used to have a pretty considerable online presence on Tumblr and Instagram. I'm not saying I was famous, but I was well known in the circle of fan art, sitting right above 10k followers at the time. I used to have a lot of fun in that community too. It was a great way to spend time, and I happened to meet a lot of amazing, inspiring people while I was at it. However, somewhere along the road, I got caught in a tornado of just crap in my real life. There were family problems and mental illness, toxic friends, all of it. And my mental state was getting worse by the hour, and at some point, I realized that my art became another draining part of my life since I was just trying to meet the tastes of my followers, acting as if it was a job or something. So, in a blunt decision, I decided to delete my socials and focused on healing myself. For around a year and a half, I didn't draw at all, and I didn't even allow myself to think about my account. As much as I felt a mixture of sadness and nostalgia, I also knew that that was for the best. And it was. I did get a lot better, and my problems were gradually solved, or at least got less complex. And I thought I was well enough to go back to the world of fan art. Remaking was difficult, I must admit, but it went reasonably well. Until the point that I got a DM on Instagram. It was an old follower of mine asking if I owned X account on DeviantArt, because my art was being posted there under a different pseudonym. I said no, but thanked them for the warning since reposting art was quite constant in my old days. I thought it was just another person plagiarizing artists, and oh man, I wish I had been right. I went to the fake page, and I was honestly flabbergasted at what I found. Not only did the person pretend to be me, going as far as using my name and my picture, but they also printed out and redrew my old art. They continued some series with a clear style discrepancy, which I saw them justify by being just a change in technique, and edited old pieces, adding details and removing colours and features. This had all been going on for months, and by that point, my heart was beating fast in my chest, and I was just so angry that I could barely think straight. In some way, I felt vulnerable as ever, and extremely furious that someone thought that it would be okay to do something like that. It felt like a bit of a sick joke, if I'm being honest. But still, I sent the person a DM on DeviantArt and said that I was the real artist, and asked politely why did she think that that would be a good idea. Much to my surprise, too, the girl responded within a few minutes, apologizing profusely and saying that she would delete everything, and she did. Now, I was pretty calm by that point. I mean, the problem got solved, right? Wrong. After that, she shamelessly tried to befriend me. Rebecca justified her actions by saying that she just wanted to be a great artist like me, and didn't think that she would get caught. which just screams bullcrap. She called herself stupid just a billion times and said that she wouldn't do that again. I told her that it didn't excuse her actions and that she'd be happier anyway with herself if she just learned how to create her own style, instead of just pretending to be someone else. Profusely, Rebecca agreed and continued to victimize herself, asking shamelessly if I could be a friend just again and again. I told her that I couldn't befriend someone that did something like that, and stopped replying eventually. Rebecca didn't, though. I would wake up with hundreds of messages from her, all in my social media. DMs on Instagram, messages in DA, anonymous on Tumblr. She would send me pictures that she drew of me, clearly copying my style, asking what I thought. Rebecca asked me if I would be a friend more times than I can remember, if I would teach her how to draw, if she could come to visit me one of these days. And my breaking point was when I woke up to her profile, remade on Insta, posting all the pictures of me that she had sent, plus 300 plus messages on DM. And at this point, I just blocked her. And she freaked out. In the course of a couple of weeks, I counted over 15 fake accounts that she made and tried to message me with. Every time, she would use a slight variation of her name, Becky or Rebs and so on, yet acted as if she was a completely different person, meeting me for the first time. The first time it happened, I didn't even realize that it was her, and I felt so stupid after I talked to her for a few days, thinking that she was just a nice fan, until I noticed the consistencies in her speech. No need to say that I was beyond angry and hurt and blocked those accounts just again and again. She wouldn't drop the act after she'd been caught, though instead, she only tried to emotionally manipulate me, crying and asking why I was treating her like that if I didn't even know her. At that point, it's probably no surprise that she knew who my friends were. They started receiving messages about me all the time, flashes of likes from Rebecca, and weird dark pictures at least once a day. The girl started messaging them all the time to know more about me, such as my Facebook profile, which I didn't have, or even where I lived. Luckily, I had warned all of them not to trust her, so they just blocked her and ignored her continuous attempts at stalking. Finally, the breaking point, and just for some context, I had returned to my art accounts for about 5 months then. 5 months of this crap happening daily. One account I didn't check often, though, was Tumblr. When I did, I logged into a few private messages, mostly from actually nice fans, and a lot of anonymous messages. One of the most recent ones was clearly from Rebecca, and as much as I don't remember the details, the message went more or less like this. If you think you're going to get away from this, you're wrong. I'm going to die, and you're the one to blame. You keep ignoring me. I can't live like this. I just want to be you. Why won't you let me? I just want to be you, but I'm too stupid, right? I'm not good enough. And so on and so forth. It honestly sounded like something from a real serial killer. As I said, that was the final drop. Quickly after that, I notified my followers that I was going on hiatus and left my accounts for another year untouched, only to return around the end of 2018. There were some traces from Becky around, such as a few PMs and fake accounts, but nothing too recent. And thankfully, I think that she may have vanished, for now at least. So this is a recent account of some unsettling events that I went through during my college years, as well as the most amazing example of the bro sixth sense that I've ever witnessed. And so, without further ado, meet Kevin. Kevin was a colleague of mine and was in the same group as me, which meant that he had maybe 5 to 6 subjects per year together, and Kevin was just odd. Not that there was something wrong with him physically, he was adorable, a bit nerdy, a bit on the shorter, scrawny side with blonde hair, big blue eyes, and like 3 fluffy hairs on his chin, I think, instead of facial hair. If I had to compare him to something, I'd say he looked like a cute soft baby chicken or something. If baby chickens were mentally inclined to grow into serial killers, that is. More on that later, though. So at first, I honestly didn't really notice him. There were a lot of people in my class, everything was new, and I personally didn't know anyone, except for a guy named Harper who I knew from my sports days, as we often competed against each other, exchanged colourful insults on the track, and then go and get drinks together. Harper will be important later on. So, as I've said, I only knew Harper there, and there were only 6 other girls in my class, as I've attended classes that held little interest among the female college population. During that time, I made friends and got really chummy with 3 more geeky guys. Zachary, whom I even casually dated for a short time. Steve, we realized that our mothers went to college together too, equals instant friendship, right? And Rick, with whom I shared many interests. So, to count it down, important guys so far: Harper, a former sports competition adversary; Zachary, kinda casually went out with for a bit; Steve, chill guy, Insta friend; Rick, nerd to end all nerds, but a well of interesting trivia, and an awesome guy. And these are the important characters because they would later become my personal army. And then there was Kevin. Damn cute Kevin, whom I made the mistake of asking if he had any notes picked up from the first half of a lecture I missed because I overslept. In Kevin speak, "Hey, got the notes from this morning?" apparently translated into, "I have interest in you, oh magnificent Kevin. Nothing would make me happier than knowing I've caught your eye. So please, make sure I'm never left without your presence again, for I just can't bear it." I borrowed his notes, partially copied them, and returned his notebook back. What I didn't see was that Kevin then sniffed the notebook when I had my back turned. Zachary noticed at first and sort of snort-laughed about it later, because my first reaction to it when he told me was to sniff myself and see if I stank or something. I was young and naive then, so the sniffing was less what's wrong with him and more what's wrong with me. And that is where it all went downhill. Over the next few days, Kevin would just always be there, never talking to anyone precisely, just kind of staring at me when we were in class and when we had breaks and went for coffee to the shop outside, and then he started showing up for classes that we didn't attend together and said he simply arrived too early for his later classes. Mind you, he never participated, just sat there in the back. Also, Kevin had a sort of aura about him, if that's the right words to use. Like, you don't have to look at the door to know when he entered the room. You just felt his eyes in the back of your head and kind of wished for a shower or something. Anyway, I didn't worry too much until one day I went to the women's bathroom during a break. I did my business, went to the front section to wash my hands, and in came Kevin. I was alone too. Kevin turned, closed the door behind him, and locked them. Needless to say, I was confused and unsure what to do, so I just stared at him and asked him if he needed something. "Hi," he said, then proceeded with, "How are you?" Like he hadn't just locked himself in the women's bathroom with me for no fathomable reason. I realized then that something was very, very wrong, and attempted not to panic, managing to keep a nonchalant expression and turn towards the mirror so I could still see him, and pretend to fix my makeup. "Fine," I said, and spoke no more. I could see Kevin fidgeting, playing with the key nervously, and after a long and uncomfortable silence, an eternity really, I heard loud banging from the other side of the door. It was Harper and Steve. Harper yelling something like, "Kevin, get your scrawny butt over here and open that door, or I swear to God in the next 10 seconds, the door ain't gonna be the only thing I'm breaking." I could hear Steve behind him sounding a bit panicked, telling him to move since he managed to get the spare key. Kevin paled at this and stepped away, the key he had falling somewhere to the floor. Steve and Harper unlocked the door, and Harper jumped on Kevin like a damn primate and knocked him down to the floor, while Steve and Rick, who was there as well, got inside and all but dragged me out of the bathroom area. None of them wanted to tell me what or why or how any of that happened, but I pushed at the weakest link, Rick, when we were alone, and found out that the whole hour prior to all of that, Rick overheard Kevin asking one of the on-campus students, the guys who get some extra cash if they help with paperwork, fixing and cleaning the campus, for the ladies' bathroom key and paying him for it. Rick obviously didn't know why the hell Kevin would need that key, but knew that Kevin was a weirdo, so he figured it couldn't be good. Later on, Steve was looking for me and asked Rick if he had seen me, and stuff kind of clicked for Rick. They asked around, and people told him that they saw me go to the bathroom area and I hadn't come out yet. More confirmed too that they saw Kevin going there too and joked that we must have a makeout session. Steve immediately connected dots. Harper overheard him talking to Rick, and they went to break me free from Kevin's affections, while Steve ran to get the extra key from the janitor. Kevin appeared with a lightly black eye in class 2 days later, and just wishing to forget the whole thing, I pretended that he didn't exist. And boy, do I wish that was the end of it. Maybe a week or two went by. I figured that he must have learned his lesson by now, because he was leaving me alone. But then, he got the wind in his sails back for some reason, and proceeded with attempting to sit next to me in class. He was so insistent that Zachary got involved, and now the guys, Harper, Zachary, Steve, and Rick, made a timetable so 2 and 2 would attend classes at all times when I was there, so each could sit on either side of me. I never asked for any of this, by the way, but they just insisted that they do it. After a few failed attempts, Kevin finally gave up and just settled for sitting in the back, glaring at my back and the 2 guys on duty that day. And again, I wish that this was the end of it. 2 weeks of that later, Kevin either didn't show up for class or just left early. I hoped that he found some other interest and that it was finally over, but it wasn't. I noticed Kevin was now following me to the bus station. It just took one time to see him standing inconspicuously behind the newspaper stand to freak out and call Steve, as he lived nearby. Steve picked me up and drove me home that day. The next morning, Harper called me around 9 a.m. and went, "Are you in my class at 10 a.m. today?" "Yeah." And he said, "Pack your crap and wait for me at the end of your street. Kevin is waiting for you at the bus station. Steve just called me." And this went on for some 5 days, as the guys extended their bro services to now accompany me literally at all times before, during, and even after class. Just to point out yet again too, I really am eternally grateful for it. These 4 dude bros of mine were like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all business and vengeance, and it was amazing and have probably saved me from a lot more problems with cute Kevin. That day, too, Kevin showed up to class looking somewhat roughed up, but now stared at me with so much hate that I could barely cope. And finally, after some sound advice from Harper and Rick, decided to bring this stuff to the college authorities. The pro dean immediately transferred Kevin to a completely different group, so our classes never overlapped again. I stopped seeing Kevin all the time and reached my final year in college. By now, Zachary and Steve moved away. Harper finished it early and no longer attended classes, so it was only me and Rick now, but it was okay because Kevin was no longer there. Rick and I eventually finished college and graduated and decided to celebrate by visiting a medieval fair in Rick's hometown that summer. We agreed to get some drinks too, for old time's sake. All was well and we had a great time as we toured the fair a bit, and suddenly, Rick, the sweet, polite Rick, goes, "Son of a bitch, ain't that Kevin?" And it was Kevin, just staring at us, and then turns on his heels and leaves. We saw him a few more times too, and I started to panic thinking that he was following me again. So Rick was already dialing a few of his friends to come over, but Kevin suddenly got lost, and after that, I never saw him again. I had not long been awake when a loud knock sounded from our front door. As I stood on the landing, I could hear my mother open the door and begin joking with whoever was there. I couldn't make out much of the conversation. It didn't concern me too much anyway, but according to my mother, he had a parcel for us and wanted her to sign for it. He didn't have a pen, so she began to close the door so that she could go and fetch one. When suddenly, I heard my mother scream loudly. And there was a man's voice shouting too, "Police, police, this is a raid." I was so shocked that I ran halfway down the stairs to see what was going on. I could see a man in his 50s with short hair and a beard, wearing a fluorescent orange vest. He was standing almost in our doorway. My mother was screaming, trying to shove him out, and he was clearly no police officer. Instinct kicked in, and I threw myself down the stairs and against the door. My mother repeatedly hit the man in an attempt to shove him out. I screamed as loud as I could to try and attract attention, but nobody came to our aid. We managed to shove him out of the door with our combined force, and we had the door almost shut when suddenly a large shove threw it back open. I was thrown back and my hip collided with the corner on our electric meter cupboard behind the door, and before I knew it, there were two men. The orange vest-wearing man and another dressed in a black coat that obscured most of his face. In a blur of screaming and hitting and shoving on the door, we managed to get them out again. My mother realized that they wanted the fake parcel back, so she picked it up and threw it at their heads. This time, instead of trying for our door again, they hurried off around the corner of the street. Once the door was locked, I asked my mother if she was all right. Both of us, though, were shaking and could barely breathe. We could have called the police right away, but the first thing we did instead was to call my dad. I was in complete shock, concerned mostly about my mother, who was crying on the phone. My dad came home from work immediately and came in to see us while we called the police. It wasn't until the police arrived that I finally just broke down crying. We put in a report and gave statements. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on our door despite everything that had happened. We gave them the CCTV footage from our front window, but it didn't get everything. It did get a good shot of their faces though, but we couldn't stay in the house after that. Every time there was a knock at the door, I would feel so afraid that I would start crying hysterically. And so we moved out about a month later. Even now, 3 years later, I'm still suffering after this event. Knocks on the door make my heart pound in my chest, though I now have the courage to answer at least. I'm always afraid, though, that it'll happen again, and every time I see someone wearing a fluorescent vest, I get so scared that I just start to shake. Also, the police, they did nothing pretty much. Despite the fact, too, that my mother broke 3 fingers in the scuffle and I came away with bruises. Our case was shelved after 6 months, and we still have no idea why they chose us. We don't know what they had planned or why they were there or what the heck was in that box, and I still feel ill every time that I think about what could have happened to us if they had succeeded in getting into our house.